All right, so for this session, we're going to be talking about the ServiceNow Service Graph Connector for OT Base. So we won't go to the store because that involves some other login processes, but once you've downloaded the app, which is currently available on the store, the first thing you're going to see is the guided setup, which I'll actually show you how to get to that over here on your nav bar. So we have OT Base on the side, we have our setup. The guided setup is a quick and easy process for configuring the very few things that we need to configure to get this up and running, primarily your credentials, and then you can test your REST API from here. We won't go through all this because anybody familiar with ServiceNow is going to be familiar with this for the most part, but the guided setup makes getting the Service Graph Connector up and running pretty straightforward. We have a couple of additional options here in this setup that allow you to do some other things, such as configure a scheduled import if you want to run this daily or weekly or whatever you want to do, or change the shortcode length, which is useful for our data set that comes in. We have location shortcodes, and sometimes our customers need more than the default ServiceNow value of 3, so you can come in here and you can change that to something longer to suit your business need. Once the Service Graph Connector is set up, and you've gone in and pulled your data in, what you wind up with is a number of tables that have been populated within ServiceNow, one of which being the OT entity list table. And so this shows you all of the information that we've pulled in through the REST API, through our mid server into ServiceNow, and it's now available here to look at, manipulate, go into each one of these records, populate all your dashboards, and really integrate all this into your existing ServiceNow workflow if you have one. In addition to the entity list table, we have our configuration items, which really houses everything you have in ServiceNow configuration item-wise. I just have this filtered down to discovery source, OT base. And then we have some additional tables such as our hardware CMDB CI table, showing more specifically the hardware side of things. These will be all of our devices from OT Base. Once again, drilled down by discovery source. And then we have, we'll get to that in a minute. So we have our configuration items. In addition to that, with the Service Graph Connector, we've built a vulnerability response application that's an add-on to the Service Graph Connector. And what that gives you is some discovered items. This comes in from the vulnerability part of it. And basically what we do is we use your existing SGC data to reference with the vulnerability application, to cross-reference that data with the vulnerability database from NVD and CISA. That all comes in and is matched and cross-referenced and populates these tables so that ultimately we have a list of vulnerable items coming from that data set that can be managed in this vulnerability dashboard. And these watch topics over here were created by me, but you can do your own watch topics. As you see, basically a watch topic is it's a filtered set of results. So if we look at this, our top level is vulnerabilities on OT assets. We have exploits available, which would be known exploits available. And then we have those on external facing assets, which anyone familiar with OT Base knows that would be your devices that are specifically tagged as being public facing out there and can communicate with the internet. Within this, we have our impacted CIs, distinct vulnerabilities, vulnerable items. All of these give you a snapshot of your vulnerabilities that exist out there on your OT assets. But let's back up for a minute and go back to the Service Graph Connector and look at our industrial workspace. So this was created using the data that we pulled in from the Service Graph Connector, and it shows us basically a high-level snapshot of the OT vulnerabilities, the vulnerability risk, vulnerable items by state, currently all of which are open because we haven't started any investigation. Actually, I think one is under investigation. Yeah, there it is, one. And it gives you just a nice high-level overview of everything you have that you've pulled in from your service, from your OT-based instance into ServiceNow. And then obviously, again, this is all great because you can really integrate your OT-based data into your existing ServiceNow workflow and have teams that are familiar with this platform be able to look at the OT-based data and then manage incidents related to those OT assets. Any questions so far? No? Okay, so moving on then, looking at this, we can obviously click on any of these and drill down into it to see what OT assets we have here. And we can drill down into any of these sections and drill down further. Same thing with state. All of these are interactive widgets that allow us to drill down and see a list of all of that. And so basically what this application does, like ServiceNow integrations, is we pull all the data in from OT-base, and it's available in these tables like the OT entity table, the configuration item table, for you to do many things, anything you want with it, right? Depending on your existing workflow. We leave that up to the customer and how they use ServiceNow and how they envision seeing that OT-based data in there and then using it and managing incident response or vulnerability management within there. Yeah, so that is kind of the high-level overview of the Service Graph Connector. Very easy to install, very simple. Couple of configuration items, few dependencies that you might need to install to get that up and running. Once you have it in there, you get all of this data that you can use. And then same thing with the vulnerability. Very little configuration involved in that. The bulk of the configuration on the vulnerability side is going to be configuring your dashboards, as it will be with the Service Graph Connector. Once you have the data in, there's a number of different things you can do with it to see it the way you want to see it, interact with it the way you want to see it. The vulnerabilities being a prime example of that. A lot of different ways you can filter your vulnerable items. These are the three we thought were the best for our use case. So this is what we set up. But you can really use this to filter down to, maybe I want to see vulnerable items on a specific location. I could do that. And then from there, I could create a remediation effort. So I could say, I want to name this vulnerabilities on Flat Rock OT assets. So then I start that process. And from there, it generates the tasks. And you can assign those tasks out to your ServiceNow team or to your team out in the field to go out and upgrade that firmware or remediate whatever other vulnerability might exist on that asset. Any questions about the dashboard here or anything like that? Yep. Okay. Well, this is pretty much what you're going to see with this. Again, a lot of the ServiceNow, what you're going to do with it is really dependent on context of your existing workflow and how you foresee interacting with it. The basic installing the app, pulling the data in, that's all very simple. There's not a whole lot to demo there. But this is something that is, highly requested by a lot of different customers in the field, and it's growing in popularity. You have your leadership coming down and saying, hey, we have all these in ServiceNow. Can you integrate with ServiceNow? The answer is yes, we do have an integration with ServiceNow. And it pulls in all of what we've decided over the last year or so, the most relevant data that you would want to see in ServiceNow so that we're not, pulling in unnecessary data points. Any questions? Anything to add? Anybody? No? All right. Well, that's about it for ServiceNow.